Number 10, Heroes in Crisis. DC's Rebirth era of comics had its fair share of duds, but it's important to remember that this publication era did also have a good amount of successes, and especially in those early days, a decent amount of momentum too. There was a time during Rebirth where it felt like DC just couldn't make any mistakes. Every series was big and exciting, it was all part of this cool plan for the franchise they seemed to have, and they finally really seemed to be focusing in on content that fans would enjoy. That all came to a screeching halt with Tom King and Clay Mann's Heroes in Crisis. This 9-issue crossover story features a special farm where metahumans and other superhero-adjacent characters would go to for mental treatment. Batgirl, Booster Gold, Harley Quinn, and the Blue Beetle all team up to investigate a massacre that happens on this farm. And hey, it seems like the start of a pretty cool team-up. The events surrounding this mystery are sinister, but these four really do seem like they could be fun together in a story. But nobody ever actually does anything in Heroes in Crisis. And spoiler alert, but we sort of just find out it was Wally West all along at the end. At 9 issues long, this is a particularly frustrating chapter in Rebirth history for several reasons. While I applaud Tom King for trying to discuss mental health in a mature and adult way, showing its presence in many superheroes in this story, he undermines his own message by making Wally West responsible for this massacre, and the reason for the murder spree can entirely be chalked up to mental health reasons. It's a deeply bizarre choice, like the story is working against its own message in a way I might even consider outright harmful. It also wastes the incredible talents of artists like Clay Mann, Mitch Gerads, and others, who bring all of these colorful and amazing scenes of this beautiful farm landscape that contrast so well with the violent nature of the murders that happen there. There's this death of innocence theme to the story that is showcased really well in the art of these comics. So it's a shame and a true bummer that said story is dedicated to kind of corrupting Wally West in a way I struggle to find redeemable. And in the context of Wally only having recently returned as a character, while knowing just how many fans Wally has, well, the fact that Heroes in Crisis is rated at only 10th place is me being a little generous. I hate this story, but it does at least have its heart in the right place. It wants to do the right thing and talk about a serious topic worth talking about. It just does a terrible job of it and kind of marks the beginning of the end as far as Rebirth's success goes, at least from my perspective. This took off the rose-tinted goggles I had for Rebirth hard, but also of Tom King pretty firmly as a writer. I really started to come to dislike the violent and graphic nature of his storytelling that exists across pretty much every title I've seen him work on. It was pretty fun for something like his Mr. Miracle series, and even in his Batman run that just barely managed to avoid making it into this top 10. Heroes in Crisis is, in my opinion, the worst example of Tom King's writing, full of his trauma dumping with little of interest to make up for it thanks to the long, drawn-out nature of his pacing. I'm sorry, I'm just not a fan. Number 9. Wonder Woman, number 31 to 50 by James Robinson. The Wonder Woman comics really struggled during the Rebirth era, though I think Steve Orlando did a pretty good job sporadically writing through the 100 or so Wonder Woman issues that came out during Rebirth. Several other writers each had their own turn with the character, and I found them all surprisingly disappointing outside of Orlando. Greg Rucka, G. Willow Wilson, and Mariko Tamaki all really didn't capture my imagination each time they took turns writing the Wonder Woman series. But only one Wonder Woman writer actually makes it onto this top 10. Only one really has the distinction of making something I feel was substantially worse than Heroes in Crisis. And that is James Robinson. I don't want to come across as too harsh here, even though I inevitably will. But it was absolutely no surprise to me that Robinson's Wonder Woman comics were underwhelming to say the least. This is a writer who has never, ever impressed me, and I just can never connect with his superhero comics. His stories are always so bland and so lacking character. They never seem to amount to something worth following as an ongoing series. I remember hating his Fantastic Four books for this exact reason, and his Wonder Woman comics really match that level of quality. Given what Robinson does during his time with Wonder Woman, it really shouldn't be that way either. In these books, Diana goes up against Grail, Darkseid, and these powerful new dark gods that I think look pretty cool. All of these are threats that should truly challenge the character as these big heavy hitters, the kind of thing that normally takes all of the Justice League to take on. Yet, this has to be one of the worst stories when it comes to making Darkseid feel like a significant and meaningful villainous threat. He is powerful, sure, but the fights with him in this story are not fun. Nothing of significance ever really happens with Darkseid or Wonder Woman, and way too much focus is instead on Wonder Woman's new brother, Jason. A lot of marketing from this time hyped up Jason as being this big new chapter in Wonder Woman's life. Jason really isn't special though, especially since it is established that Diana is loosely part of the Greek pantheon at this point, meaning Wonder Woman already has a de facto large family of siblings, aunts, uncles, and even nephews. So Jason having the power of the Greek gods and being related to Wonder Woman doesn't really mean anything, and it entirely rests on his character to stand out instead. Now, in the hands of a competent writer, that's fine. You can take any character and make them interesting enough that the readers will like them. But Jason doesn't really have any character to speak of. And I say this as one of those weirdos that actually liked Wonder Woman during the New 52 era. But even if you hate those comics, you can't tell me that Hera and all the Greek gods that Diana was hanging out with back then didn't have a lot of character to them. Jason is nothing in comparison. He's a boring blank slate of generic normal guy with nothing to distinguish himself. The best I can state is that his narrative purpose adds stakes and mystery around the whole Darkseid thing, but then he just gets killed off in the next story arc that ends James Robinson's run with the series with the Dark Gods. That death left me with no emotional impact whatsoever. Because these books are just so lame and they suck so much, so all of this collectively easily secures it a spot on this top 10. Number 8. Teen Titans. Teen Titans suffered a lot of ambiguous behind-the-scenes drama in the early days of its launch that led to one of the artists leaving the series basically before it even really started being published. In spite of that, Teen Titans of the Rebirth era looks great, and sadly doesn't have a lot else going for it. The series in its early days is all about Damian joining the team, and I found the experience completely miserable. Damian hates all of his teammates, and they hate him. It's hard to enjoy any of these stories with such a terrible character dynamic going on, but it's all intentional. I've never quite seen anything like it. It starts with Damian's birthday, and somehow it might be the most joyless experience I've ever seen with the team. Especially with Starfire. And it's definitely in no small part thanks to how much this Robin alienates her and everyone else on the roster. If the characters aren't bad enough, it doesn't help that the actual stories are frankly hollow and quite boring. So sure, while these comics might look pretty nice and visually feel full of life, these are some of the most boring comics in all of Rebirth. And there's not much worse a series can be than boring. I mean, sure, this is all subjective, but I'd much rather be reading something memorably bad like Heroes in Crisis over something forgettable and bland like Teen Titans. The good news, at least for me, is that the series went through a major shakeup following the No Justice event. Teen Titans got a new creative team, and though the premise was the same, the team was now built from the ground up entirely by Damian, all to service his increasingly corrupt and sinister agenda. With Damian in control of the events, the character dynamic vastly improved in my opinion, but most people don't like this side of Teen Titans either, and I could see most fans ranking the entire run of Teen Titans during the Rebirth era on their personal worst of list. For me though, that change of dynamic meant everything, so I'm really only counting the first half of Teen Titans myself. Number 7. Batman, 3 Jokers. So, back in the days of the Darkseid War, before even Rebirth had happened, Batman learned the Joker's identity through the Mobius chair, but somehow got 3 answers. That mystery was dangled over DC fans for years, with lots of build-up and plenty of delays. And so it was finally only during the Rebirth era that we started to get an answer through this short mini-series by Jeff Johns, resolving this dangling plot thread that I will remind you he himself is the one that originally brought up. And it's nothing. 3 Jokers is just a bunch of pretentious nonsense with no firm answers or any sense of meaningful emotional catharsis. And that's the whole point of a story, is to make you feel like something of significance happens. Something of significance doesn't actually have to happen, you just have to feel like it happens. That's the point of a story, is to make you feel something, and I believe that the 3 Jokers fundamentally fails at that. In this story, the 3 Jokers kind of arrive in Gotham, and then the Red Hood kills one of the Jokers, though it feels like it has no permanent effect on the character whatsoever. It might as well have not happened, since we apparently have 2 Jokers to spare. One of the Jokers menaces Batgirl for a little bit, but again, nothing of significance happens there. And then the last Joker wants to make Joe Chill into the ultimate Joker, since he's the one who made Batman, but instead Joe just kind of dies and makes amends with Batman a little bit before he does. To say the 3 Jokers was deeply underwhelming is a huge understatement. The 3 Jokers, as characters, don't even really feel that different from each other. They're all just slight variations on the same dark, modern take on the villain, with little to meaningfully distinguish themselves aside from associating a couple of the Jokers with a few of his more memorable stories. But we're talking about death in the family and the killing joke here. Top shelf stuff that really the most basic Joker fan is going to have heard of. The only reason this isn't rated much worse is that I feel like Jason Fabok and Brad Anderson did a great job at making this comic look beautiful visually. These are nice looking comics with a lot of love put into their artwork. I hate the story, but these 3 comic book issues are individually quite stunning little things to look at, to the extent that I don't really regret getting a print copy of each when they first came out. I just really wish they did something interesting with the story because I got nothing out of it. I'm all for an ambiguous ending where we are left guessing as a reader, but we need to be given stuff to actually guess and get excited about. In a world of multiverses and alternate timelines, who really cares about a few extra Jokers? Number 6. Titans, number 1 to 22. Titans got a lot of positive attention in the early days of Rebirth from just about everyone, myself included. Not only did it bring about the return of the long-absent version of Wally West, who had been gone since the early days of the New 52, but mysterious forces appeared to restore the memories of the entire Titans team of everything that had ever happened to them. It was, at first, a cool and cathartic moment, as this team with this decades-long history reunited with each other, including a full understanding of the context of their relationship together. It still gives off this very wholesome potential for all these long-lost friends to see and spend time with each other once again. But I feel, looking back on the series as a whole, Titans became obsessed with these old memories to the point it poisoned half the run. Every single story, every single villain, everyone just feels obsessed with remembering everything in these comics. It's wholesome at first, but gets so old so fast the entire series stalls out. First we have to deal with Wally's memories, and Wally coming back, and hey, it's great, it genuinely is great. But then Deathstroke comes along and has this whole big thing about his memories and remembering what happened to one of his kids and having this Lazarus contract set up with the Titans, and now he remembers that. It's all about his memories. But then there's Mr. Twister, and he got erased from reality, but guess what? Now he's back and he's also got a big bug up his butt about memory. And then that's it. That's the whole first half of the run. The team falls apart and breaks up before we ever really got to see them actually do anything together or enjoy each other's company like a good superhero story should do. I couldn't believe it looking back on these comics, but there's just nothing there and nothing to them. I normally really like Dan Abnett, the writer of these books. He's done a ton of stuff I really found impressive, ranging from the Guardians of the Galaxy comics that inspired the modern film franchise to some of my favorite Warhammer 40k novels out there. But I don't think his early Titans comics hold up well at all. Like Teen Titans though, this series got a major shakeup following the No Justice event. With a new team and a new energy not totally fixated on characters' old memories, Titans goes from terrible to great over the course of a single issue. What's really interesting about that is it's still written by Dan Abnett. He never actually leaves the series for its entire run, but whatever the case might be to explain it, this new team just brings a whole new energy to the comics because they go from unbearable to great. You can basically ignore the first 22 issues entirely and enjoy the second half of the series just like with Teen Titans. And that's a good thing because those 22 books don't hold up well at all in my opinion. And they wind up being one of Rebirth's biggest disappointments. Number 5. Dead Man. Dead Man was an ugly, silly little miniseries that came out during the Rebirth era and easily stood out as one of the worst in the entire 5-year history of this publication period. Written and entirely illustrated by Neil Adams, Dead Man is essentially an exercise in how not to make comics. Every page is ugly, and every plot point is barely conveyed with a sense of coherence. It's a mess, best witnessed just for the sake of seeing someone having the audacity to actually publish something like this, because really, nothing is quite like a Neil Adams comic. Adams is actually a legend in the industry if you don't know. His name is attached to some of the best comics ever made in the entire history of DC. But that was a long, long time ago, with his best days and best work decades behind him. Nowadays, Adams puts out these nonsense comics that are always nothing but a parade of gibberish and badly formulated art. Dead Man is no surprise if you've read some of Adams' other relatively recent work, like Batman vs. Ra's al Ghul or Batman Odyssey. All these comics look and read very similarly. The sole saving grace of Dead Man is that these kind of Adams comics are always the adorable kind of Brad that is inherently entertaining because of their sheer messiness. That prevents Dead Man from being ranked at number 1 because, believe me, there's some argument it deserves it. But there is something fun also about reading these comics and going through some of these pages and just seeing how ridiculous it all is. That works maybe for a single issue, but actually getting through all 6 comics is a bit of a chore more than anything else. So it very much deserves a spot somewhere on this top 10. Number 4. The Hellblazer, number 1 to 12. I was not ready for the tragedy that is these comic books. Constantine has always struggled to remain a quality character the more he's become ingrained in the world of the larger DC superhero universe. The specific horror tones and graphic sensibilities of the earlier Hellblazer comics feel like a distant memory more often than not, and are generally avoided in the modern world of DC Comics, where you might find Constantine in something like Justice League Dark or on television with the Legends of Tomorrow. That especially feels true going over the first 12 issues of The Hellblazer, an absolute disaster among the roster of Rebirth comics. These comics were all written by Simon Oliver, who doesn't seem to have any experience writing anything quite like Constantine before, and it really shows. There's something so awkward and off-putting about the way these comics were written. It feels like a heavily watered-down version of the graphic and creepy original Hellblazer comics, to the extent I was thoroughly unimpressed. Even the art feels lifeless and completely lacking that classic Hellblazer edge I'm talking about. That feeling compounded significantly when I hit issue 13. Tim Seeley takes over writing duties, accompanied by a significant shift in the art team, and the style is 100% different. It's a shocking change in quality as the Hellblazer in my eyes goes from one of the worst comics in all of Rebirth to one of the absolute best. Seeley shows exactly what Oliver was missing almost immediately, and everything I like about the classic Hellblazer comics comes surging back for a glorious 10 or so issues before the publication was sadly cancelled. I can't blame people for giving up on this series though. The Oliver comics are just so bad. Most people aren't going to know the series isn't worth picking up until only after skipping the first 12 issues entirely. That's weird. That's very specific, and I didn't know about that until I started making this video. So, yeah, the Hellblazer is disappointing on several levels, at least those first 12 comics. Number 3. Event Leviathan. This was written by Brian Michael Bendis and with art by Alex Maleev. These two creators have worked together for a long time, even before Bendis made his big move from Marvel to DC during the Rebirth era. This comic shows that in spite of DC making a big deal of securing Bendis at the time it happened, it was always a questionable decision to hire the man on to begin with. Bendis has created a lot of stuff I like. His work on Ultimate Spider-Man was great, even before he created Miles Morales. I also really liked the man's early work on the New Avengers titles. But by the time he had moved over to DC, Bendis had already been putting out stuff like his X-Men comics for a while, and they were profoundly underwhelming. Event Leviathan, sadly, is no different. It's all about this criminal organization called Leviathan taking out every major spy organization on Earth in a single day, and consolidating all that power into their own group. There's a mysterious guy in a mask orchestrating all of this, but don't worry, he's just some random character most of you will have never heard of, and that's about it. At 6 issues long, it's a neat idea, but little more than a waste of time. The whole point of this story is not some sort of emotional journey for the lead investigators trying to figure out what Leviathan is up to, which, by the way, is Batman and Lois Lane, and that's pretty cool. But it's not some big adventure for them or anyone else. No, all this really does is denote a new status quo in the DC universe that is never really followed up on in a meaningful way. I looked this up, and there's basically no follow-up to any of this anywhere else. So Event Leviathan just kind of sucks. It's boring, pointless, and completely absent of any fun ideas or twists. I like Maleev as an artist in the right context, but this story doesn't work for him. It's not him at his best, probably because Bendis doesn't give him anything creative to draw, and there's really nothing fun to be done from an artist's perspective. Even from a writing perspective, it is so disappointing. It's so cool to me that Lois stars in this crossover event and is the big driver of solving this mystery with Batman. But that mystery is executed and paced out terribly. There's no clues or any sort of payoff to the mystery, and I still don't really know or understand what the point of it all was, other than to trick people into buying some fundamentally empty comic books. Number 2. Slybored. This series is easily one of Rebirth's absolute and most embarrassing chapters in its entire history. Only a bit over 20 issues long, Slybored isn't that substantial of a read in terms of page count, but was absolutely miserable and deeply disappointing getting through it. The first 18 issues of this series are all written by John Semper Jr., a veteran writer with a lot of experience in the world of television. He's actually the first person to come up with the Spider-Verse idea, and also worked on the Static Shock television show. However, his experience in the world of comics is comparatively more limited, and I think it's kind of obvious looking over these books. Slybored's first 18 issues are almost all dedicated to dealing with this evil machine of sorts that Victor's dad was working on when developing the technology to help make Slybored. Along the way, Slybored winds up meeting and teaming up with a female version of himself, and the whole thing to me feels very insular and reductive. Instead of building a bigger world around Slybored, introducing new villains or memorable allies and characters for him to meet along the way, Semper feels like he is largely just tacking on more stuff to Slybored's origin story, or just adding a gender-swapped version of the character without really changing anything about them. None of that is good world building to me. Worse still, the story is just so long and drawn out, while the dialogue feels stilted, way too abundant for what should be a fun action series, and like everything else in the Slybored run, it's just so boring. I found the art didn't ever really look great in spite of a rotation of usually solid artists coming in and out of the series, and I'm kinda left having to blame the writing for that. I was also hoping that things would get better once Marv Wolfman took over the series late into the comics run. Wolfman, after all, created Cyborg, so he certainly knows the character well enough. If anything though, things get much worse. Wolfman introduces all these new characters and giant mech suits that I guess Cyborg is supposed to pilot around with these new buddies he meets. But before even the first story arc is finished, before Cyborg really even gets a chance to do any of that, the series was cancelled, abruptly ending without any sense of conclusion at all, or even really letting us get to know what was the plan for these mechs or what Wolfman was going to do with Cyborg. This is actually rare for Rebirth. I'm not really sure it ever really happened anywhere else. Sure, lots of series got cancelled, but they all got to eke out some kind of meaningful conclusion to them. Cyborg just ends. It sucks and cements it as one of the biggest disappointments in the whole Rebirth era. Perhaps what bothers me most of all is that this is Cyborg's second solo series. DC really wanted to make him into the next big mainstay character, one that would deserve a regular spot on the Justice League and justify having this huge role in the cinematic universe they were planning at the time. I'm not against that idea for the record, but if that's going to happen, Cyborg needs a full roster of meaningful villains that he can regularly face. I would argue he doesn't have a single non-Titans villain like that other than maybe Grid, and that's just an evil version of himself. Victor also needs people in his personal life that stand out and are important to readers, but I don't think anyone other than his dad really qualify for that status yet, even after these two series. Both the New 52 and Rebirth had the perfect opportunity to build Cyborg up, make him into this big character that has all these cool characters, and to prop up Cyborg and everything around him. And twice now, I feel like that chance has been completely squandered. Cyborg is no better off than before the New 52. There's no extra character work to him that I think is really worth delving into. Nothing that's really come of it. That's a level of disappointment that luckily Rebirth didn't often rise to. But there is one other example that's just so much worse. Number 1. Late Era Superman. Superman started out so strong in Rebirth, with Dan Jurgens returning to the character after a memorable run with the Man of Steel in the 90s. Superman came back with his old pre-New 52 memories, along with Lois Lane and a new child named John. With Superman a full-fledged family man now, and other big changes like Lex Luthor being inspired by the New 52 Superman to become a sincere superhero, the Superman comics felt different, and more importantly, they were fun and refreshing. It's hard to think of a time as a comic book reader in my life where I was ever more excited about Superman than I was during the early era of Rebirth. Yet about halfway through the run of Superman, things changed severely. The most obvious element of that change was Brian Michael Bendis. After rather publicly leaving Marvel and with much fanfare coming to work for DC, there was a lot of marketing for Bendis is coming, but I remember being especially skeptical of the news that he would be given complete control over Superman. And I was not wrong. Gone was all the charm and energy of those early Rebirth era comics. The intriguing mysteries around Rebirth were largely replaced with a toothless and generic story about Rogal Zar, the most boringest villain you'll ever meet, created by Bendis, who was revealed to have been behind Krypton's destruction. Again, like other stuff we've talked about on this list, these ideas aren't terrible in and of themselves, and it has a lot to do with execution, but it very much is that same thing I was complaining about with Cyborg, where we are just stapling on these unnecessary details to a superhero's origins. It's all in that execution, though. Bendis has an awful pace to a lot of his writing these days, so it takes forever for even the most basic story to unravel. I found his Superman stories always move in the most boring direction possible, while a lot of the charm between characters like Superman and Lois that existed before vanishes entirely. Stuff like Lex trying to be more heroic was abandoned, even if that decision was probably something bigger going on within the company outside of Bendis. And the net effect of it all is the same. Something fun and interesting that had been built up before was suddenly gone. Without a doubt, though, the worst element of this all, the worst decision of all, has to be the breaking up of Superman's family, as Bendis has John go off into space for a while, and the young boy comes back aged into a young adult practically overnight. This has a number of terrible consequences in the process. First, it essentially disappears the character we had gotten to know since his emergence, and I really loved John as he existed. John was a bright and innocent kid who had an interesting relationship and friendship with Damian Wayne, a special bond with Krypto, and other little details that made him feel like a filled-out character worth following. All of that basically went out the window as John came back, aged into a new person. It makes sense that being in space for, from his perspective, years, and no longer being a child would fundamentally change John as a character. I'm not against the logic behind the decision, but I am disappointed to have something fun just disappear, and worse still, the new, older John isn't exactly a more interesting character. Bendis adds some details to him that does at least somewhat show how John contrasts with his father, but it isn't the same as what we had before. I think the hardest part to accept about it all, too, is that the whole thing creates distance between all three members of the family. John has now spent most of his life away from his parents. He doesn't have the same bond with them as he did when he was a child, and the pain that causes both Lois and Clark at least temporarily drove a wedge in between their own relationship with each other. None of this makes for a very fun comic book read. And worse still, this had severe knock-on effects for the entire line of Superman-related comics. Super Sons, a fun series depicting John and Damian working together, was permanently sidelined into oblivion after John was aged up. Supergirl went from being at least an acceptable series into an absolute mess that nearly made it onto this top 10 as a result, as her character goes off into space to look for even more pointless content concerning Rogol Zaar. Bendis took over both the Superman and Action Comics series, severely degrading the pace and quality of both comics. It was an absolute mess, but I do have to say, the more I have thought about it, somehow, in spite of all of this, I can't say that's all entirely on Bendis. Superman was, in reality, already running into problems during Rebirth, starting around the Oz effect, well before Bendis took over. It's in that story that we learn that Mr. Oz, this mysterious figure who's a big part of Rebirth's larger narrative and had been stalking various characters throughout the early days of this comic book era, was actually Jor-El all along. The reveal was extremely underwhelming and once again cannibalizes Superman's origin story for little gain in terms of overall quality or new extra details. As much as I liked some of the stuff Jurgens did with Superman, it kind of became clear to me after a while that while he had a good handle on the characters, the larger ideas and mysteries going on with the plot, Superman's return, and Rebirth were never really fleshed out, planned out properly, or committed to. That's how this wound up taking the #1 spot, because in a lot of ways, what happened to Superman best expresses the disappointing side I find about Rebirth as a whole. This era of comics had a lot of strong ideas and fun concepts at play. Some series really came into their own once Rebirth came along, and there were a lot of successes to be had. But looking back on the publication era as a whole, and some of the worst entries it had to offer, I do feel to a degree that Rebirth did struggle a bit with executing some of its bigger promises of a new direction with exciting, game-changing things in store for our superheroes. In a lot of ways, titles like Superman proved we were destined to get nothing but more of the same. And that's not too fun to think about. But that's it for the video. Be sure to subscribe, maybe throw me a like, and I'll see you all next time on Comic Island. If you have any fun ideas for top 10 videos you want to see, make sure to leave them in the comment section below, because I'm always looking for more of them. Thanks, guys, and I'll see you next time.